My wife refused to touch me for months. Then I saw her hotel booking under a fake name. I am a 38-year-old man, and the first sign wasn't distance, it was precision. My wife, Nora, started hugging me with the exactness of a yoga pose. Her hand would land on my shoulder like a trained bird, her body tilted at the same safe angle every time. She said she was touched out, that work had turned her into a screen that burned hot by 5 p.m. I told myself seasons exist in marriages. Then the season stayed. It began in March, when the company announced layoffs. She survived, but the survivors were given two people's workload and a new vocabulary of burnout. She started falling asleep on the couch with her laptop open and earbuds still in. The second week, she moved her pillow to the edge of the bed so we both sleep better. The third week, she said no with a softness that felt like a boundary with a quilt over it. After a month, the no had calcified into routine, the way you stop noticing the hum of the fridge until it turns off. We tried all the normal prescriptions. Walks after dinner. Phone-free zones. A weekend with no plans that turned into a weekend of laundry and a leak under the sink. When I suggested counseling, she kissed my cheek and said, "It's not that deep," which made me feel melodramatic for wanting my wife. I started volunteering for late calls just to dodge the moment my body and the bed remembered each other while she pretended to sleep. By June, her calendar had become a forest of color blocks that rarely included me. Friends' birthdays, client dinners, a Pilates class at 7 a.m. an industry mixer that started at 9 p.m. and ended with a rideshare to an address I didn't recognize. I am not a jealous man by nature. I am a man who pays attention. I noticed the new perfume she called nervous system, the way she changed her passcode after years of our shared joke, 0829 for our wedding date, the stamina she suddenly had for nights out that never yielded a story. I tried to stay literal. When she said she felt off, I bought magnesium and ran a bath and found a playlist named Forest House. When she said the city felt loud, I booked us a cabin 2 hours north. She cancelled the night before because the quarter is closing. When she said she wasn't in the mood, I swallowed my own like a vitamin without water. The crack widened one ordinary Thursday. I was forwarding a receipt from our shared email to the accountant when a hotel confirmation slid into the inbox. Subject line: "Your stay is confirmed, M. Delcourt." Delcourt wasn't our name. The body of the email glowed with polite certainty: late check-in Friday, 1 queen bed, 2 breakfasts, parking included. The credit card listed the last 4 digits of our joint. The email address was ours. The reservation name was not. I clicked the details before my better angels could ask me to breathe. The hotel was on the other side of town, near the river, the same block where we used to eat tacos from a window the year we got engaged. The booking had been made at 1:11 a.m. a time Nora usually spent asleep, or pretending to. I read the note field twice: "Please ensure discretion." The word had a professional tone, like a politeness learned from other lies. I stared at the screen until the light felt like a hand on my face. Then I took a screenshot and sent it to myself, to that private folder in the cloud where I keep scans of warranties and medical receipts, and now the first hard evidence that I hadn't invented the tremor I felt in our house. I didn't confront her. Not immediately. I lived next to the knowledge for 24 hours like you live next to a sleeping dog you're not sure is friendly. I did the dishes, I folded laundry, I sat on the edge of our bed and put my socks on like I was auditioning for the role of a functioning adult. When she came home late, she smelled like citrus and a lobby. I asked how dinner was. She said, "Fine," in the tone of a person swinging a gate meant to look open. At 11:08 p.m. she plugged her phone in on her side of the bed face down and turned, spine to me, the way a person turns when the script requires it. I lay there and listened to the house make its night sounds and thought of the name in the confirmation. Delcourt. A word that felt borrowed from a novel whose plot I hadn't agreed to join. I do what I always do when the ground moves: I made a timeline. March, touched out. April, hours stretch, passcode changes, excuses multiply. May, the 1st, Mixer, a rideshare to the River District. June, M. Delcourt. Next to the dates I wrote the exact sentences she'd used. It's not that deep, you're overthinking, let me be tired without making it about you. Seeing the words separated from her voice drained them of the anesthesia they'd had in the room. There's a deadening humiliation in asking to be wanted by someone who has already cut your request into a shape that fits their new furniture. So I did nothing dramatic. I took Friday off without telling her and drove across town in the late afternoon, finding a parking spot under a ginkgo that had stained the curb a brilliant, sour yellow. I sat in my car with the AC on low and watched the hotel's glass doors. At 7:16 p.m. Nora walked in, alone, hair loose, the navy dress she saves for client pitches. The concierge leaned forward with the indulgent smile of someone who likes secrets. She didn't hesitate at the desk. She spoke 2 sentences. The clerk handed her a key card and pointed toward the elevators with a palm that could have been offering a blessing. I didn't follow. I stared at the building number until it went soft. Then I drove home because I had no idea what I would do with a hallway confrontation besides sob and soil my dignity. In our kitchen, I took a picture of the empty fruit bowl like an idiot because I needed new evidence to balance the old. We had no apples, I had no marriage, and both facts lived on the same countertop. She came back after midnight. She washed her face with the meticulousness of a person preparing for surgery. When she slid into bed, the mattress shifted and released a cold bloom that smelled like the lobby. I lay there and tasted metal in my mouth and thought about how the body keeps records the mind tries to misfile. In the morning, I made coffee and said her name and watched the muscles in her jaw decide which version of herself to be. I told her I'd seen the booking. She tilted her head the way she does when she's being patient with amateurs. She said it was for a client, that the company had asked her to check on the venue for an event. She said the name was the coordinator's request, standard industry practice. She kept her face open and soft like sunlight through gauze. Then she laughed a tiny laugh that sounded like a stage direction, lighten the mood. She reached for my wrist and squeezed it and told me I was spiraling. It's not that deep, she repeated, the same anesthesia now with a second dose. I stood there and felt my organs try to leave the room. I wanted to perform heartbreak loudly until someone called the police. Instead, I texted the accountant to ask if we could freeze the joint card due to suspected fraud. I sat at the table and took a photo of her shoes by the door because I couldn't believe something that belonged to the woman I married could also be attached to the stranger who stood in front of me using words like paperwork to turn me into a stain on her narrative. She spent the rest of the day performing normal, groceries, a load of towels, a call with her mother, a nap that wasn't quite sleep. I worked on my laptop and opened a blank page and typed the entire confirmation email by hand because I needed the sentence to live in my fingers, not just my eyes. At dinner, she asked if I wanted to split the last tomato. I said yes like a person learning a second language as an adult. We sat in our chairs and chewed and I tried not to cry because I had no idea if I was mourning the marriage, my self-respect, or the version of me that had believed sunlight. The next week, the refusals changed flavor. She stopped pretending to be exhausted and started making principled boundaries. She said intimacy felt transactional lately, that my energy made her feel scored instead of held. She recommended a podcast about relationships that sounded like a manual for people who wanted to survive love without actually surrendering anything. She said she didn't owe me access to her body to prove she loved me. I agreed because that sentence is true and also because arguing with a true sentence is a good way to look like a monster. The tautology worked, it kept me quiet while she built a new room inside our old house. 2 more confirmations came into the inbox over the next month, each with new hotel names and a fresh courtesy, discretion requested. Each time I watched from my car like a man with a self-control problem and left like a man who didn't trust his own mouth not to scream in a lobby. Each time I saved the file in a folder titled Record. Each time, I came home and sat in the bathroom with the fan on because the noise hid the sound a person makes when they realize their life has been edited without their consent. Shame is a poor historian. It jumps from chapter to chapter and skips context. I needed context. So I called a therapist and said my wife won't touch me and my house smells like a lobby and I have a folder labeled record instead of the sleep married people are supposed to have. The therapist asked for a picture of a single good day in the last month. I gave her Thursday morning when Nora forgot to perform distance and put her head on my shoulder for 3 minutes while the kettle boiled. The therapist said to hold on to those 3 minutes like a buoy until I decided whether I was swimming toward shore or letting the ocean take me somewhere else. On a Tuesday in late July, a second name joined the story, a receipt for a florist, 2 streets over from the River Hotels, for a bouquet of lilies with a card, for M&N, always Friday. The lilies' smell, heavy and funereal, rushed into my throat from a memory 15 years old, my grandmother's dining room, a vase, grief dressed up for company. Always Friday sounded like 2 people pretending to be teenagers with adult money. I put my head on the kitchen counter and pictured the man who had earned the fake name, and I hoped he tripped on every curb. When I finally broke the silence, I didn't pick a fight. I picked a Wednesday afternoon, bright and loud. I asked Nora to sit at the table and I read from my own notes like a deposed witness. Date, time, confirmation names, the exact sentence, please ensure discretion. She told me I was paranoid and cruel and needed to work on my attachment style. She said I was trying to police her independence, which is bratty when you're 16 and weaponized when you're married. She said I was choosing ledger over lyric. I told her I was choosing sanity over a plot twist. She stood up and left the room. When she came back, she had the hotel phone number written on a post-it, like a dare. Call them, she said, and smiled in a way I didn't recognize. I called. I asked for the manager and put the phone on speaker. I asked if a corporate inspection had been scheduled under the name they'd used for her. The manager, too polite, too fast, said they did not share details about guests. I thanked him and hung up and stared at the yellow paper until the ink swam. Nora said, "See," like the word contained a verdict. That night, she moved a suitcase from the top of the closet to the floor. No drama. No announcement. A piece of furniture changing rooms. She said she needed space and would spend a few nights at a friend's. I asked which one. She said it didn't matter. She kissed the air near my cheek and left with the rolling noise of wheels that suddenly sounded like an instrument tuned to heartbreak. 10 minutes later, my inbox pinged with a familiar subject line, this time to an address I didn't control. I sat there and listened to the house finally stop humming and I understood the leak was no longer theoretical. In the morning, I called a lawyer whose website used words like steady and plan and had no sunset pictures. She told me to breathe. Then she told me to stop paying on the joint card, to print bank statements, to make a list of everything that could turn into dispute. She said not to leave the house unless I wanted it to become hers by inertia. She said to be boring in every text. She said to think about what I wanted besides dignity. I said I wanted my life back. She said, that's not a filing, but we can try to protect the pieces that make one. The next email I wrote was to myself. Subject, what I know. I wrote 3 lines, she refused touch for months, she booked hotels under a fake name with our money, she has rewritten my need as pathology. Beneath that, in smaller font, I am not crazy. I am not weak for wanting proof. I am not unkind for calling a thing by its name. I closed the laptop and, for the first time in weeks, slept. By the time she texted, I'm staying with Maya a few nights, the folder labeled, record, had grown fat with polite betrayals, reservations, florist notes, ride receipts ending at the same handful of blocks, the new passcode that had taught me my face no longer unlocked our life. I answered, received, and nothing else, because the lawyer had told me to make my sentences courtroom safe. Inflammatory texts help no one, she'd said, and I believed her because my rage had started writing dialogue it couldn't afford. I had one mercy I could still give myself, a checkup. I booked blood work and STD screening and sat under the clinic's ancient magazines pretending to read while I measured my breathing against the second hand of the clock. The results were clean. The doctor said stress will eat a man if the man doesn't ask it to leave. I asked if there was a prescription for that. She smiled like someone who has learned to survive her own story and said, document. Decide. Don't perform. Nora came home Sunday to swap clothes and the dress shoes she always called interview armor. She looked good. Betrayal often does. She moved through our space like a guest with a key, polite, perfumed, careful not to disturb. She asked if I'd watered the snake plant. I nodded. She asked if I'd seen the gray sweater with the elbow patches. I handed it to her from the back of a chair and did not say, "It smells like the lobby." She said she'd be at Maya's until midweek. The suitcase rolled again. The click of the door felt less like departure and more like punctuation. We had entered a paragraph where the pronouns had changed. I told her by email that I wanted to separate formally. I wrote it like a memo because the part of me that wanted to write it like a poem had been laid off. I proposed a schedule for splitting the apartment until we figured out who stayed, who left, and how to pay for the empty that followed. I attached a worksheet my lawyer had given me titled, Interim Arrangements, which sounded like a hotel euphemism, and maybe that was fitting. She replied with a paragraph about shock and cruelty and my lack of empathy for burnout. She ended with a sentence that made me sit down, I will not be judged for having friends. The second mercy I gave myself was backup. I told my sister. Not the embellished saga, just the frame and the photos that explained why my voice had become monotone. She came over with food and a sticker book her kids had left in the car by accident and a look that said I was not insane. She sat at the table and asked what I needed. I said I needed someone else to see the proof so my brain could stop offering Nora's version equal airtime. She looked at the emails and receipts, then at me, then said a sentence that landed like the first stable plank in weeks, "You're not being dramatic. You're being accurate." Accuracy became my survival trick. I stopped asking why and started asking when. When did you change your passcode? When did the hotels begin? When did touched out become principles? I recorded dates in a spreadsheet that would bore anyone who didn't need the boredom. It steadied me more than any prayer I knew. On a Wednesday, I received the first truly stupid message of the year, a chargeback notice from the hotel, guest disputes amount based on services not rendered. I called the manager and, in my best professional voice, asked what service my wife believed had been withheld. He cleared his throat and said the word amenities in a way that made me feel like washing my hands. I thanked him, hung up, and forwarded the notice to my lawyer. She wrote back in under 10 minutes, "This helps." Nora fired the first legal flare a week later, an email from her counsel asking me to refrain from monitoring her movements and infringing on her autonomy. It was dressed in concern but smelled like performance. My lawyer answered with 3 points. No monitoring had occurred beyond the shared email account, financial discretion is not stalking, booking hotels with joint funds invites scrutiny. I read the exchange 3 times and felt a little piece of stupid shame die. Then came the conversation I had been avoiding and somehow craving, the one where we put nouns beside numbers. We met in a neutral place our therapist suggested, a community center room with chairs that stack and windows that don't open. The therapist was the kind of steady that makes you trust somebody else's furniture. We were instructed to use I statements and to tell the truth like we were building a shelf together and bolts cost money. I said I was hurt. I said I was not crazy. I said the hotels were not client inspections. I said I wanted to separate with dignity and to keep the apartment if finances allowed. Nora said she was suffocating long before any hotel, that my need had felt like surveillance, that she had made mistakes, but also that women are allowed to have lives. The therapist stopped us when the nouns began to curdle into labels. She asked what we could guarantee each other during the untying. I guaranteed no midnight scenes, no shows at workplaces, no ambushes. Nora guaranteed nothing concrete, only space, which is both everything and nothing when you're the person who stays. The next day, my lawyer filed a notice of separation and proposed a temporary support schedule that read like a rental agreement carved into law. Numbers do not love you, but they treat you fairly if you show your work. Nora balked. Her counsel countered with a payment schema that presumed I would continue to subsidize the part of her life that happened near lobbies. My lawyer marked it up like a teacher grading a confident essay that cut corners. We got closer to reasonable. Friends kept trying to hand me better stories to hold. Maybe it's a phase. Maybe it's grief. Maybe she's addicted to novelty. The only story that fit the facts was less poetic. She built a second life one receipt at a time and told me my need for the first life made me controlling. At church, a man I barely know put a hand on my shoulder and said, "The devil attacks marriages," and I wanted to ask him if the devil also books Riverview rooms with breakfast for two. Instead I said thanks and sat in a back pew and stared at a stain on the carpet until I could breathe again. It wasn't all ash. In the space where my old life had been edited out, some boring goodness crept back. I started cooking with the kind of intention you use to sand a piece of wood. I ran at dawn and watched the river pretend it was new. I fixed the cabinet hinge she'd asked me to fix for months, not as penance but as proof that making things work is still a language my hands speak. I slept some nights. I didn't others. On the not nights, I read the same essay about ordinary courage until my heart believed it for an hour. The moment I stopped needing her to confess arrived in a form I didn't expect, a hotel folio mailed to our house by mistake, addressed to M. Delcourt, care of our real address. It itemized breakfasts, minibar, valet. It listed 2 guests. It listed a massage on Saturday at 3 paid for with cash. It was the universe's photograph, unfiltered. I didn't show it to her. I scanned it to the folder and then, for the first time since March, I deleted a copy of something, because I didn't need a library to believe the book. We signed an agreement 2 months later. The apartment was mine. She took the car she preferred and agreed to buy me out of its equity with a transfer that felt like a bandage on a bruise. We split the savings like people who didn't hate each other, which is not nothing. We agreed not to cast each other as villains on the internet. I boxed her books and sweaters and the mug that said, "Nevertheless," and left the box in the hall for her cousin. I kept the cast iron skillet because it was mine before us and will be mine when I make breakfast alone. On moving day, the official one when her key stopped working and my lock turned, she came by for the last of her plants. The snake plant left with her, stubborn and alive. She stood in the doorway a moment longer than she needed to. She said she was sorry I had made it into this. I said I was sorry she had too. We weren't talking about the same it. We never would. She left. I changed the lock. I took a shower that felt like rinsing off a language. I made eggs. People want finales. They ask if she's still with the lobby. I don't know. Maybe. I deleted the folder from my desktop and moved its contents to a secure drive with a sensible name because I'm not reckless and because sometimes the past needs to be stored somewhere you don't trip over it. I kept one thing on the fridge, a list my therapist made me write of what I know when I forget what I know. It says, I did not cause someone else's secrets by wanting to be touched by my wife. My asking for the truth was not violence. Paper is not petty. Paper is memory when memory gets edited. Dignity is quiet and easy to miss. Keep choosing it anyway. This week I took the long way home and walked past the taco window by the river. The tacos taste exactly as they did when we were engaged, which made me uncomfortable and then oddly grateful. I ate one on the curb while a couple nearby argued gently about cilantro. The hotel's glass caught the late sun and looked like a promise to someone. I let it be theirs. I have my own promises now, groceries on Wednesdays, runs on Saturdays, the hinge that no longer squeaks, a skillet that remembers breakfast for one is still breakfast. My wife refused to touch me for months. Then I saw her hotel booking under a fake name. That's not the whole of me, it's a chapter. The rest is small and stubborn, a man who writes dates down when people ask him to doubt himself, who chooses ledger over lyric when the lyric is written by someone else, who still believes in touch, the kind that doesn't need lobbies to pretend it's love.
Follow me for more stories.